So the next thing we want to do is to be able to use the Strymon Big Sky delay and timeline on the sends of the console. So I like to patch that into the patch bay so that we can pull it up on the console sends and apply it to any channel of the modular voices that we want. So the way it works here is that on Big Sky, we're taking the left in, the mono input, and that's coming up on aux1 in the patch bay, so that when we send aux1 from the mixer, that's coming into Big Sky on the left input, mono input. And then the return from that is coming up on channels 23 and 24 back into the patch bay on 23 and 24 on the mixer as a stereo pair. And then the same thing on timeline. We come out, left out, mono out into aux2, so aux2 on the mixer. Our return for the timeline delay is coming up on channels 21 and 22 of the mixer in the patch bay as a stereo pair. Okay, so the way that I have the Strymons to be able to track the send effects with the modular is because if I just multi-track out of the console the direct outs back into Nuendo, then the send effects that are the return tracks on the console are not going to be printed to the audio. And that's not what I want. I don't want to have it so that I have the modular voice isolated track in the clear and then the send effects printed separately. I want it all in one thing. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to take the main outs of the console and bring that back in to Nuendo on channels 1 and 2 this time. So we mute everything else. And this way we'll be recording the stereo image of the Strymons, and the send effects will be printed to the track. That means that we have to track out each voice individually. So if we listen to, for example, the Plots voice, which is a mono voice, but it's going to the two stereo effects. If we listen to that just dry, it sounds like this. Okay. And then if we add the Strymon Big Sky reverb, so on our aux send 1, and then we're going to add the Strymon timeline delay on aux send 2. Right, so that's how I want it to sound. I want it to sound, to be printed with the effects. So we're going to track out each voice and go down the line like this. Maybe we'll just start with the Plots. For each of the modular voices, elements, all the way down, I've put a stereo audio track under that. And in the stereo audio track, we have an input of inputs 1 and 2 from the mixer. And then I'm sending that to no bus because I don't want it to come back out through the main mix again. So just to print it out, I go with no bus. You could mute it, but I'd rather do it this way. That way I'm sure I'm not going to get a feedback loop. I had mentioned about the this here with the tracks that I'm recording with the modular, monitoring that without using a bus, selecting no bus in the output of the tracks that we're recording. And basically, just the reason that I like to do that is because, well, I have been known to forget to solo those tracks, and then other things will come back up on the mixer and we get a feedback loop. So that's why it's just usually my preference to just select no bus, and then I can monitor what we're recording through the monitor section of the mixer. So I'm just listening through the mixer and not through the DAW, but we're printing to the DAW. But for the purposes of this, so that's why, if you see here in Nuendo, I usually will have no bus selected when we record. But for the purposes of this and recording into the screen capture, I'm just going to select an output bus here, which would be the one that it would go to eventually. And what I would send all of these modular synth voices to would be my synths bus, synths all, I label it. And so that way it goes into the screen capture. This would be the elements. And it's going through also Strymon Big Sky reverb and the Strymon timeline delay. And the Big Sky is set to a preset called Relax. And on the Big Sky, because it's going into the sends, I have the mix turned all the way up. And then the timeline is using a preset called Downer, which has kind of a pitch shifted repeats on the delay. Maybe some other stuff going on, I'm not totally sure, but I like those. There's a lot on both the Big Sky and the timeline that's really nice, just the presets. And then if you want to go in and customize all that and just make your own, it's got a lot to work with. And also, obviously, the mix is turned all the way up because we're using the sends here. And I'm sending those post fader, obviously. Sometimes with the send effects like this, I like to actually do it pre-fader so that I can pull the dry track all the way down and just have the effect return at full volume without any of the dry signal in there. But in this case, that's not what we're doing. And in this case, we're using a lot more of the delay on the elements than we're using the reverb, which was the opposite of the plots that we just recorded. So that's the deal with that. A couple of things there about the elements. First of all, the level that we're recording into. If you look at the main meter there in Nuendo, the mix bus meter, you see that the levels are really very conservative, and that's for two reasons. One is that just in general, you don't really have to slam it too much. At a certain point, you start getting more self-noise out of your converters than anything that's helpful so far as the level. You can gain these up very clean and easily with plugins, with compressors, or just clip gain. And then the second thing, really though, even more important than that, is that this is basically going to be the level that I want it mixed at within the track. So I would rather just go ahead and print it at this level than what I used to do would be to feel like I needed to get a full, more robust recording in the gain and then clip gain it down to mix it later. And it's kind of the same philosophy as just going ahead and printing the effects into it if you kind of know that's where you want it to go, instead of adding it all later and then trying to mix it in. Just trying to get as much in the recorded part printed the way it's going to be mixed as possible, and I know that's how I want those to go. The second thing would be the MIDI part of the elements. If you look here in the window, so you see that these this MIDI part is from the piano part that we tracked earlier, that we sequenced earlier. And normally what I do with those kind of parts like this, with a piano part, is I'll pick out voices, notes within that sound good and fit well in the voice of the synthesizer module, whatever it is, and then use that. But sometimes I like to just see what the whole thing will do, because a lot with the modular synth, it's a mono voice. So obviously it's not playing all these polyphonic things, but it'll jump around to parts that were kind of in between. And I'm not exactly sure how it's going to react to all that, so I just kind of like to see what it does. And the way it worked with playing the higher notes that are on the upper register of the piano part, and then when there are these gaps, then it skips down to the lower bass notes in the left hand and has this kind of thing going on. I just liked how it sounded that way, so I didn't mess with it too much and just let it do whatever it's doing with that MIDI information that it has. The one other thing about that, though, if you look, for example, down here at this harp part, on the plonk and the rainmaker, that this would be an example of, this came from this harp part that we sequenced up here, and it's got a lot of notes. A lot of notes in there. It's kind of an arpeggio thing that you would kind of hear a harp play, maybe. That wasn't working so well going into the plonk, going into the rainmaker delay, so this would be more typical of what I would do with those kind of patterns, of where you just kind of take out bits and pieces of it and see what sounds good on that particular synth voice. So we'll just keep going like that down the line. The next one that we're going to track is the rings plus the monsoon. Monsoon's like a variation of clouds with some more parameters, CV controllable parameters. We're not using any of the send effects here on aux 1 or 2, so no Strymon Big Sky or the timeline. For the EQ, I do have the EQ in on a lot of these. On this particular one, 12K, we've got that rolled off a lot on the top end there. And then about 25K here. And that's rolled off maybe 6 dB. Then down here we've got about 350, and that 350 came from when I tracked the drums. 350 is a common roll-off frequency, but it seems pretty good on this, so I just left it, and that's coming down about 6 dB. And then we've got a shelf here on the bottom 60 hertz. Yeah, about the same there, about maybe 6 dB or so, maybe a little more. That's the timeline. It doesn't need any more reverb because we've got the big sky. This would be adding in the timeline. And that's nice, but I feel like we've got a lot of that kind of already going on. And this particular voice is good as it is. Here's without the EQ. And without the EQ, it sounds good by itself. It's kind of like an acoustic guitar. Like if you EQ that really nice just as a solo instrument, if it's a solo instrument, that's one thing. But then when you try to put it in the mix, it's really easy for it to be just way too much. So the next thing that we're going to do is to set up another stereo track, and what I want to do is to get a composite mix of all of the modular synth voices that we have so far. I like that we have individual stems of each one, each voice, but I think it would also be nice to have just as additional material, a stereo mix of in real time of all of the voices together so that we can kind of play with the parameters and make the effects sort of work with each other, just in case we get into a situation later where the effects that we put on the individual stems is too much, or if we just need more variations and something slightly different. That will be one option. I'm just going to duplicate this stereo track here. Delete this. Rename. What we want to do is to solo all of our modular MIDI tracks, and we'll bring in our input monitoring here. Actually, we don't need that, but we'll bring in our input monitoring here. We'll go to our synths all bus. Let's just see where we're at here. So I can see that I want to bring the Plonk and Rainmaker down. And you can hear, in this case, what I mean by the effects all together start to build up a little bit. So far as a stereo mix, we might want to back everything off. So I think I want the Elements voice to lead a little bit. I think I want that to be the most prominent in this mix. And here's our rings. Let's see what we want that to sit. It's just rings. What we could even do, let's see if we pan the elements all the way to the left and the rings and monsoon to the right. How does that work? I think I like it better the other way. Keep it stereo. Okay. And then here's the plots. And we'll add in our plonk with the Rainmaker. It's taking out parts of the harp part. All right, so it seems like we've got a pretty good level here on our stereo mix, and then we'll just kind of work with it, see what happens throughout the course. So we'll track it all the way out. Our plonk and Rainmaker. Plots. Bring in elements. Gonna back Big Sky off of elements for a minute. The Rainmaker giving us some noise. More of the timeline on the elements. Here's our rings and monsoon. Let's see if we can get something if we add in the timeline. Yeah, that tail coming in, that's the timeline. And then we'll have one more shot here with the plonk and Rainmaker. Add in more timeline. More Big Sky. A lot of timeline. Let's try to get as much out of it. And then we'll boost it up here just to get the tail. That is all of this section of the modular. Now, one thing to note is there's very little of any kind of modulation, CV modulation happening to any of those. It's really a very simple instance of all of these modules. There's not a lot going on. There's a whole lot in the Rainmaker that I almost never use. I almost never use the comb filter part. But some of the other stuff, the pitch shift, a little dab of that'll do you. The main reason I'm not using a whole lot of the modulation right now is because I want to try to keep the pitches correct before I start messing around with it, because we want to add other things later. And if we start throwing in a lot of modulation right now, that can get difficult at the end to try to then fit other instruments in. So at this point, I think what I want to do is track the drums out. We're going to do that in a way where we track the drums out and then convert the audio to MIDI and then use those MIDI parts to further sequence maybe some more. We've got one more Rings voice here and maybe a couple of the Doepfer oscillators just to see what happens there with that. So that's the next thing. If you found this content useful, consider joining me over at my Patreon. Your support there is most appreciated and helps me to continue creating this content. But more so than that, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, turn on the bell for notifications. This is the best way that you can help support the channel, and it doesn't cost a thing. All right, we'll see you in the next one. And as always, thanks for watching. Okay, hold on, we gotta have a break. For some reason I can't think. Okay, this is it. This is the one. All right, here we go. Okay. I mean, I could just write it down and then it would all be like that, but I don't want to do that. And here we go. This is it. This shouldn't be so difficult. I don't know why. And helps me to continue creating.